The Texas sun was merciless that afternoon, scorching everything in sight. A gleaming silver Cadillac Escalade sat stranded on a dusty backroad, its polished chrome blinding under the heat. The tires had sunk slightly into the soft, sandy earth, surrounded by sprawling ranchland and a scattering of mesquite trees. Inside the SUV, Karen Whitfield was fuming. She clutched her phone like it had personally betrayed her, screaming at the screen in a futile attempt to summon a signal. Beyond the vehicle, a solid metal gate stood locked with a thick chain and an industrial-grade padlock that looked like it belonged on a freight ship. No landowner in sight. No one to argue with. But Karen was about to learn that out here, HOA rules didn't mean a damn thing. My name's Tom Rodriguez. I've been the owner of Double R Ranch for over a decade and a half. It's 300 acres of wild peace bought with 2 decades of hard work on offshore oil rigs. My land borders a place called Willow Creek Estates. A neat little development with identical homes, manicured lawns, and people who thought property lines were just polite suggestions. For years things stayed civil. They stayed on their side, I stayed on mine. That was until Karen took over as the head of their HOA 6 months back. She didn't just enforce rules. She invented them. Measured grass with a ruler, issued fines for slightly faded shutters, even scolded people if their trash cans were visible for more than half an hour. But the real problem wasn't what she did in the neighborhood. It was that she thought her authority stretched beyond it. To her, the entire county was under her control. And when she rolled onto my land without permission, it wasn't just annoying. It was personal. It all began on a hot Tuesday when I was out repairing the eastern fence. Dust trailed behind a vehicle barreling down my private road. Through the cloud, I saw the unmistakable glint of Karen's Escalade. She pulled up beside me and leaned out the window, putting on that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something. Claiming she was running late for a board meeting, she asked if she could cut through my ranch to save time. I wiped the sweat from my brow, stepped closer, and told her politely but firmly, this was private land, not a shortcut. She scoffed, talked about being a good neighbor, and when I didn't budge, muttered about some people lacking community values. She backed out, huffing all the way. I assumed that was that. I underestimated her. The next morning, fresh tire tracks told the story before I even made it to the fence line. Her SUV was parked a good distance into my land, and there she was, snapping photos like she was preparing a zoning lawsuit. When she saw me coming, she didn't flinch, just strutted over with that clipboard of hers, saying she was conducting a survey for the HOA about neighboring land impact. I asked if she had my consent. Her answer? Something about how individual rights were less important than community interests. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just pushy. She was delusional. I warned her. 5 minutes to leave or I'd call the sheriff. She laughed and mentioned that Sheriff Martinez was her cousin, so I shouldn't bother. Then she turned away and kept snapping pictures. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just drove back to the house in silence and started packing. Into my truck went my fishing gear, camping supplies, and the heavy-duty padlock I usually kept on the equipment shed. I waited until she drove further into the ranch, probably looking for more violations, then circled back to the main gate. I wrapped that chain around the steel gate and fence post 3 times and locked it tight. Key in pocket, I headed north to Lake Buchanan for a well-earned break. For the next few days I fished, read books, and slept under the stars. No phones. No complaints. No HOA. Karen. She never crossed my mind. Well, maybe once or twice, usually when I was sipping coffee at sunrise, knowing full well she was still out there. On the 4th day, I drove into town for supplies and powered up my satellite phone. 17 missed calls, all unknown. I didn't check the voicemails. Later, I learned what happened after I left. Karen had stayed another hour taking photos before heading back, only to find the gate locked. First came the outrage. She called 911, but the dispatcher wasn't buying her story. Private property, no permission. Civil matter. No emergency. With no cell reception and no friendly ears to listen, she spent the night in her SUV, trying to conserve fuel and watching shadows move outside her windows as the coyotes howled nearby. The next few days weren't kind to her. Her water bottle was half empty. Her designer shoes weren't made for walking, and she wasn't going anywhere with barbed wire on both sides and a locked gate up front. She tried to climb it once, ripped her skirt and gave up. She started rationing snacks, using her SUV's dome light sparingly, and honking when she thought she saw headlights, hoping someone would rescue her. By day 3, the HOA realized something was wrong. Vice President Janet called an emergency session after Karen missed inspections and a hearing. Her husband Richard reported her missing, but the tone in his voice, according to neighbors, wasn't fear. It was relief. They searched the usual places, parks, neighborhoods, even her favorite sandwich shop. No one thought to check my ranch. Everyone knew I kept to myself. And nobody in their right mind believed Karen would have the gall to trespass here again. But she did. By day 5, her situation had worsened. Sunburnt, dehydrated, and running low on hope, she tried once again to scale the gate. This time she got tangled in the chain link and ended up with scratches on her arms and burrs in her hair. It was on the 8th day, right as I pulled back into the ranch with a cooler full of base and a sunburn on my nose, that I found her. Slumped in the driver's seat, windows down, face drawn and exhausted. She didn't scream this time. Didn't argue. She asked for water. I handed her a bottle and called the sheriff. Not her cousin. The actual sheriff. They came out, listened to the whole story, and gave her a stern talking to about trespassing, boundaries, and rural law. I didn't press charges. Figured the sun, the dust, and 8 days of ranch justice were enough. Since then, I haven't seen her near my land. And something tells me the HOA meetings have been a little quieter. The leather seats of the Escalade were scorching under the brutal Texas sun, and the air inside the SUV was thick with the stale scent of heat and desperation. The chrome trim on the vehicle shimmered like a mirage in the empty ranchland, but it offered no comfort. Karen clutched an energy bar she dug from the bottom of her purse, her fingers trembling. The battery on her phone had long since died, and despite hours of waving it toward the sky and climbing onto the roof in search of a signal, nothing had worked. She had tried everything, honking her horn in desperate rhythms, flashing her headlights when night fell, screaming until her voice cracked, but the ranch was too isolated. No one came. Each night she curled up in the back seat, flinching at every snap of twigs and distant howl. Coyotes got bolder by the evening, and more than once she was certain she saw eyes glinting in the dark when she flicked her lights on in a panic. By the 6th day, a kind of survival madness took over. She clawed at the hard earth beneath the gate with her hands and a tire iron, trying to dig herself out like a trapped animal. Her nails were broken, the emergency kit half emptied, and the sweat-soaked designer blouse stuck to her back. Once so composed and manicured, Karen now looked feral. She even considered drinking windshield wiper fluid. By the 7th day, the local news had picked up the story of the missing Homeowners Association president. The coverage had an oddly amused tone. Interviews with her neighbors revealed more irritation than concern. One man even told the reporter, grinning, that he'd finally replaced his outlawed mailbox while she was missing. Richard, ever the loyal companion, had hired a private investigator to retrace every step Karen had taken in the past month. Meanwhile, Karen remained trapped, physically and now emotionally undone. On the 8th morning, I was wrapping up my camping trip and heading back home, driving with the windows down and country music humming on the radio. A notification had popped up on my satellite phone about local news, but I ignored it. I figured if it was important, I'd find out soon enough. As I neared my ranch, I saw the Escalade still stranded just beyond the gate, dustier than before and covered in handprints on the windows. I parked my truck, took a swig of warm coffee and casually walked up. From inside, Karen's head popped up like a spring-loaded toy. Her face was sunburned, wild-eyed, and filled with a twisted mix of relief and unfiltered fury. She began pounding on the glass, shouting something I couldn't make out. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key to the padlock, and calmly began undoing the chain. As the gate creaked open, Karen flung open her car door and stormed out, her movements erratic and her voice shaking the silence. She unleashed a torrent of accusations and threats, raging about lawsuits, the FBI, the Supreme Court, and every legal entity she could summon in her heat-fried brain. She jabbed a trembling finger at me, declaring this was kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, psychological torture. I let her shout. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I reached into the truck and handed her a folded brochure I'd picked up at a roadside rest stop. The title, How to Respect Property Boundaries, a Guide for Good Neighbors. I offered it with a small, polite smile. She snatched the paper, glared at it like it was poisoned, then tossed it to the dirt before stomping back to her Escalade. The engine screamed to life, and she reversed so fast that gravel shot into the air behind her. I didn't bother to relock the gate. I just closed it and headed inside for breakfast. By midday, Sheriff Martinez showed up at my door, clearly reluctant. His first words were an apology. Karen had filed a complaint, but once he'd seen the security footage and heard my version, he shrugged and said it was clear she'd been trespassing. There wasn't anything criminal on my part. Hers, on the other hand, well, that was another story. Word of the incident spread through Willow Creek Estates faster than wildfire. Within 2 days, the neighborhood buzzed with talk of Karen's misadventure. The next HOA meeting was packed with residents who hadn't attended in years, some even bringing popcorn. Karen tried to frame the whole ordeal as an attack on the authority of the HOA, but it was no use. One by one, residents stood up and shared their own run-ins with her. Petty citations, passive-aggressive letters, fines for absurd infractions. The meeting ended with a no-confidence vote. The result was near unanimous. 47 in favor of removing her, 3 opposed. Her problems didn't end there. The private investigator, hired through Richard, submitted an invoice for $8,000. Her employer let her go for disappearing without explanation. A towing company billed her $1,200 to remove the Escalade she'd abandoned in the dust. And then came the final blow. A criminal trespass citation from the county, including a $500 fine and 6 months probation. When the judge read the sentence, Karen's face flushed with disbelief. She started to protest, but her attorney clamped a hand on her arm and whispered something that made her slump in silence. She sat there in her wrinkled, stained outfit, no longer the ruler of suburban order, but just another defendant learning the hard way that rules, once so sacred to her, applied to everyone. Even her.